My husband was too angry to speak to me face to face, so he sent me an email instead. I opened it 12 days after giving birth to our son, sitting in the kitchen at 7 in the morning with a sleeping newborn on my shoulder, and I read the words that ended my marriage, even though it would take me another year to admit it. He said our son wasn't his. He said he wouldn't be a part of my life, or the baby's life, until a paternity test proved otherwise. The man I had loved since I was 19 years old, the only man I had ever been with in my entire life, accused me of cheating in a typed message he sent from the other side of our own house. But to understand how he got there, and to understand the thing he confessed later, the thing that was so much worse than the email itself, I have to take you back to the beginning. I'll call him Marcus. We met when I was 19 and he was 21 at a birthday party for a mutual friend where neither of us really knew anyone. I was the shy girl clutching a red cup of soda in the corner, and he was the guy who noticed. That's the thing about Marcus that I need you to understand from the start. He noticed everything. At the time, it felt like magic. He noticed when I was cold and gave me his jacket. He noticed when I'd had a bad day before I said a single word about it. He noticed the tiny scar above my eyebrow that no one else had ever asked about, and when I told him the story behind it, a bicycle, a mailbox, a very bad 7th grade summer, he laughed like it was the best story he'd ever heard. I fell fast. We both did. Within 3 months, we were inseparable, and within 6 he told me he loved me, standing in the rain outside my mother's house because he didn't want to wait until we were inside. It felt like a movie. Everything with Marcus felt like a movie in those early days, and I was so young that I didn't stop to ask what kind of movie it was. I should mention something here because it matters to the story in an ugly way later on. I'm white, and Marcus is black. It never mattered to us. His family welcomed me from day one, especially his mother. I'll call her Denise, who folded me in her Sunday dinners like I'd always had a chair at her table. My family loved him too. Whatever tensions the outside world wanted to project onto us, inside our little bubble, it just wasn't a thing. Our kids, we always said, we're going to be beautiful. And they are. God, they are. The first crack showed up so early that I mistook it for devotion. I was 19, we'd been together maybe 8 months, and I mentioned I was going to grab lunch with a friend from my old job, a guy named Tyler, who I'd known for years and had never once thought about romantically. Marcus went quiet in this way I would come to know very, very well. Not angry, quiet. And then he said, gently, reasonably, that he didn't think it was appropriate for people in relationships to hang out one-on-one with friends of the opposite sex. He said it wasn't about trust. Of course he trusted me. It was about respect, about optics, about not putting yourself in situations. He said it so calmly, so lovingly, that I remember actually feeling guilty, like I'd been the careless one. I canceled the lunch, and a rule was born that day, a rule that governed the next several years of my life. No opposite-sex friends, not alone, not ever, unless he knew about it and was comfortable with it. I told myself it was fair because it applied to him too. I told myself lots of things back then. We got married when I was 22. The wedding was small and perfect. Denise cried harder than my own mother. And Marcus looked at me during the vows like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. I want to be honest with you. There was real love there. That's what makes stories like mine so hard to see from the inside. It would be easier if he'd been a monster from the start. He wasn't. He was warm and funny and generous. And he was also, quietly, keeping a ledger I didn't know existed. If I took too long to answer a text, there were questions. Not accusations, questions. Where was I? Who was I with? Why did it take 40 minutes? He never yelled. He'd just get that quiet voice, that disappointed stillness, and I'd find myself explaining a trip to the grocery store in minute-by-minute detail like I was testifying in court. I called it his anxiety. I told myself no one is perfect, every marriage has its things, and this was ours. His thing was jealousy. My thing was, I don't know, leaving dishes in the sink. Equivalent, right? That's genuinely how I thought about it. 2 years into the marriage, our daughter was born. I'll call her Zoe. She was planned, wanted, celebrated from the second the test came back positive. And Marcus, I have to give the truth its due, Marcus was incredible. He came to every appointment. He read the books, The actual books with a highlighter. When Zoe was born, she came out looking like the exact midpoint of the two of us. His eyes, my chin, skin a perfect warm blend, and Marcus held her in the delivery room and wept so hard the nurse asked if he needed to sit down. For 2 years, he was the father other mothers pointed at in the park. Diapers, night feeds, tea parties on the living room floor with a plastic tiara jammed onto his head. When I watched him with Zoe, every doubt I'd ever swallowed about the rules and the questions and the quiet ledger dissolved. This was a good man. I had married a good man. Then I got pregnant with our son. He wasn't planned. Exactly. We'd gotten careless, the way married couples with a toddler get careless. And when I showed Marcus the test, he picked me up off the ground and spun me around the kitchen. He was thrilled. He wanted a boy so badly he could taste it. Though he swore up and down he'd be just as happy with another girl. And through the whole pregnancy, he was everything he'd been the first time and more. I was sicker with this one, and Marcus picked up all the slack with Zoe, so I could lie on the bathroom floor in peace. He took the entire week of my due date off work. He pampered me. Foot rubs, my favorite takeout, cold washcloths, the whole performance of a devoted husband, except it wasn't a performance, or at least I don't think it was. I still don't fully know. That's one of the cruelest parts of all of this. I can't trust my own memories anymore, because I don't know which moments were real. What would you have done in this situation? Looking back on years of love, trying to figure out which parts of it you were allowed to keep. Let me know in the comments, because I've been asking myself that question for a long time. Our son was born on a cold December morning. I'll call him Eli. Labor was fast and brutal, and when they finally put him on my chest, slick and screaming and perfect, I looked up at Marcus to share the moment. That lightning strike moment we'd had with Zoe, and my husband was not looking at me. He was looking at our son with an expression I had never seen on his face in 6 years. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even shock exactly. It was something cold and arithmetical, like he was doing a math problem and hating the answer. He looked at Eli for maybe 3 seconds. Then he turned around and walked out of the delivery room. No word. No glance. The door swung shut behind him, and a nurse and I made eye contact for one horrible beat before she plastered on a smile and started talking loudly about how much the baby weighed. Here's the thing about Eli, and I need to say it plainly because it's the entire hinge of this story. My son was born light. Very light. Much lighter than his sister had been. His hair was soft and fine, his skin was pale, and if you'd seen him in the hospital nursery, you might not have guessed his father was a black man. I knew, because I had done nothing wrong, because there was no version of reality where that baby was anyone else's, that this meant absolutely nothing. Genetics are a slot machine. Newborns darken over weeks and months. I'd read about it. I'd even seen in Marcus's own extended family, where his cousin's kids ranged across every shade imaginable. When I looked at Eli, I saw Marcus's nose and Marcus's exact ears, and that same funny cowlick pattern. I saw my husband's son. My husband looked at that same baby and saw evidence of crime. I didn't understand any of that in the moment, though. In the moment, I was lying in a hospital bed, torn up and shaking and flooded with hormones, holding a minutes-old human, while the man who had rubbed my feet for 9 months was somewhere in the building deciding I was a liar. I told myself he was overwhelmed. I actually did that. Lay there generating excuses for him while a nurse stitched me up. Maybe seeing his son had hit him differently. Maybe he was calling his mom. Maybe. He came back hours later, and he brought Zoe to meet her brother, and that visit is one of the strangest memories of my life, because it was 2 visits happening at once. To Zoe, he was daddy, warm, laughing, holding her up to see the baby, look at his tiny hands, baby girl. To me and Eli, he was a stranger at a bus stop. He did not hold our son. He did not kiss me. He stood physically angled away from us the entire time. And when visiting hours ended, he took Zoe home and left me alone in that room with a newborn and a feeling in my stomach like wet cement. The 2 weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life. And I say that as someone who would later spend a year functionally alone with 2 children. He came to bring us home from the hospital and barely spoke in the car. At home, he moved through the rooms like a lodger. He was still good with Zoe. Perfect with Zoe, actually aggressively normal with her, which somehow made it worse, but he did not touch Eli once. Not once. I would be up at 3 in the morning with a screaming newborn running on 90 minutes of sleep, and Marcus would roll over and put a pillow over his head. This was the same man who had fought me for night shifts when Zoe was born. Fought me. Now he acted like the crying was a neighbor's car alarm. I kept trying to build a bridge to him. I'd hand him the baby, and he'd find a reason his hands were full. I'd say, "He has your ears, look," and Marcus would leave the room. Every day, I woke up thinking, today, he snaps out of it. Every night, I went to sleep in a house that felt like a hell breath. My theory, for most of those 2 weeks, was that he was wrestling with something internal. I'd read about fathers who took time to bond, about postpartum depression in men, about the weird tangled feelings a man can have meeting a son specifically, all that legacy weight, the relationship with his own father, which had been complicated. I gave him room. I didn't tell a single person what was happening. My mom lives several states away, and when she called, glowing, asking how the new grandbaby was, I chirped out a happy voice I didn't recognize and said everything was wonderful. You want to know why I didn't tell anyone? Because I was protecting him. I was so sure this was temporary that I didn't want to plant a bad image of Marcus in anyone's head that would outlive whatever this was. I was 2 weeks postpartum, abandoned in my own home, and my chief concern was managing my husband's reputation. Sit with that. I have to, every day. Finally, one night after Zoe was down, I stopped him in the hallway and made him look at me. I asked him what was going on. Really asked, voice shaking. No more careful diplomatic openings. And my husband, my adult, 27-year-old husband, looked at me and said he couldn't talk about it because he was too angry and that he would email me. Email me. We shared a bed. We shared 2 children. And he stood in our hallway in his socks and told me that whatever was eating our family alive was going to be communicated via email, like a billing dispute. He walked past me into the bedroom, and I stood there in the hallway holding a burp cloth, feeling the ground I'd built my whole adult life on start to slide. The email arrived the next morning. I've already told you the heart of it, but the details are what stayed lodged under my skin. It was long. It was composed. You could tell he drafted it, edited it, chosen his phrasing, which meant every knife, and it was placed deliberately. He wrote that it was obvious to him, and he claimed to anyone with eyes that Eli was, and this was his phrase, a white baby. He wrote that he had done the math and thought about it from every angle and could not accept that this child was his. He wrote that he wasn't stupid and wouldn't be made a fool of. And he wrote, "This is the part 1 read 6 times because my brain refused it, that he would not be involved in my life or our son's life until a paternity test proved he was the father." Our son's life. He put conditions on being a father to a 12-day-old, and he CC'd nobody because this wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. We post new stories every day because, believe me, the part that comes next is the part one still can't tell without my hands going cold. I want to be extremely clear about something because when I eventually shared pieces of this with strangers, it was the first thing everyone asked, and I understand why. I did not cheat on my husband. Not once, not ever. Not emotionally, not physically, not in any universe. Marcus is the only man I have ever been with in my entire life. I met him at 19 with zero history, and I was faithful to the letter of every rule he ever set, including the ones that isolated me from half the human race. There was a 0% chance, not small, not unlikely, 0, that Eli was anyone else's. So when I read that email, I wasn't afraid of tests. A test would prove me right in a laboratory with paperwork. What gutted me was that he needed one. 6 years of turning over my location, my friendships, my minutes, 6 years of proving myself in 1,000 small daily trials, and the account was still empty. The verdict had been sitting there loaded the whole time, waiting for an excuse. My first instinct was rage. I typed out a reply that was 2 words long, and the second word was "you," and my thumb hovered over send for a long, long minute. But I had 2 babies asleep down the hall, and some cold strategic part of my brain that I didn't know I was already awake and talking. It said, "If you refuse, he divorces you and a court orders the test anyway, and you'll have burned yourself down to spite him." So I deleted the rage, and I sent back one line, "Eli is your son." We will talk about it when you get home. Then I put the phone face down on the counter, fed my son, and cried into his little shoulder until his sleeper was wet. And now I have to tell you about that evening, because that evening is when this story stops being about a paranoid husband and becomes about something else entirely. Marcus came home from work transformed. Transformed. The stranger who had haunted our house for 2 weeks walked in the door, hung up his coat, and picked up Eli. Picked him up, held him to his chest, talked to him in that soft sing-song voice he'd used with newborn Zoe. He smiled at me. He asked how my day was. I stood at the kitchen counter watching this and feeling my skin crawl because nothing had happened yet. There'd been no test, no results. Nothing had been proven or resolved. The only thing that had changed was my one-line email. I was doing a craft project with Zoe, and then it was dinner, and the whole time this friendly, affectionate alien wore my husband's face, and I smiled back at it because our daughter was watching. When Zoe was finally in bed, we sat down at the kitchen table, and I had my speech ready. I'd rehearsed it while stirring pasta. I would agree to the test on the condition of couples therapy, because a marriage where this accusation was possible was a marriage with a broken load-bearing wall. I never got to give a speech, because Marcus folded his hands on the table, calm as a loan officer, and told me the truth. He had already done the paternity test. He'd done it the first day Eli was home, swabbed our son's cheek behind my back in my own house while I was probably asleep or in the shower, and mailed it off. The results had come back. Eli was his. He'd known. He'd had scientific proof in his hands, and he'd looked at that proof and decided it wasn't enough, because the birth had planted the seed that I might be cheating in general, now, currently, somehow. So he wrote that email anyway. He wrote the email after the test confirmed his son was his, and he sent it hoping the pressure would make me confess to an affair that never existed. When I didn't crack, when my answer was a flat, wounded statement of fact, he decided, and I'm quoting the man directly, that it was finally okay to trust me. That's why he'd come home warm. In his mind, I had passed. The interrogation was over, the suspect was cleared, and the warden was in a good mood. I sat at my own kitchen table and felt the temperature of my whole life drop 10 degrees. Do you understand what he'd done? It was never about Eli's skin. Eli's skin was the pretext. My husband had manufactured a 2-week abandonment of his newborn son, refused to hold him, refused to look at him, as a psychological pressure campaign against me, and he was telling me about it with a faint air of generosity, like he was delivering good news. You're cleared. We can be a family now. He genuinely seemed to expect relief. Maybe gratitude. I looked at him, and I heard myself say, very quietly, that I wanted us to go to couples therapy. And Marcus said no. Immediately, reflexively, the way he'd said it every other time I'd raised it over the years. No, therapy was for broken people. We could handle our own business. No stranger needed to be in our marriage. There was room in our marriage for a secret cheek swab and a sting operation, but not for a counselor. I should have said the sentence that night. You know the sentence, agree to therapy or I'm leaving. It was right there in my chest. But I looked around that kitchen and did the math of my actual life. A 2-year-old, a 2-week-old, no job because he never wanted me to work, no local friends because of years of the rules, family states away. The sentence stayed in my chest. I told him okay, fine, and I took the baby monitor and went to sleep in the nursery chair. And that Christmas, Eli's first Christmas, I moved through like a ghost in a holiday sweater. Denise hosted. Everyone cooed over the baby. Marcus played the beaming new father flawlessly, and I used the newborn as a shield, always busy, always feeding or changing or soothing so that nobody would look too closely at my face. I could not look at my husband across that table. Something had died at the kitchen table 2 nights before, and I was the only one at Christmas dinner who knew we were seated next to a corpse. 2 mornings later, before Zoe woke up, Marcus found me in the kitchen and apologized. A real-sounding one, the best I'd ever gotten from him. He said he could see how much he'd hurt me, and that if therapy mattered to me, he'd go. And here's the truth, I whispered to nobody. It landed on nothing. 2 days earlier that sentence would have reached me. Now it was a rope thrown to a spot in the water where the swimmer used to be. I said okay, we'd go, and I meant it. I would try for the kids with everything I had. But some love-bearing structure inside me had been condemned, and no inspector was ever going to certify it again. He'd been a wonderful father again for 48 hours. It was 2 weeks too late, and the wonderful father of the first 2 years now looked different to me too, backlit by what I'd learned he was capable of doing to his own infant son as a chess move. We did go to therapy. I want you to know I honestly tried. For a few sessions, he even showed up, arms crossed, answering the counselor's questions like a man being deposed. Somewhere in those weeks, gently prodded, I asked him the question strangers on the internet had put in my head. Had he ever cheated on me? Was that where all this certainty about betrayal came from knowing what it looked like from the inside? He blew up out of that quiet stillness for one of the only times I can remember, called the question disgusting, and I never got an answer. I still don't have one. Then he started missing sessions. Work, traffic, headaches. Then he stopped pretending to have reasons. And as therapy fell away, the rest of him started to slide with it. Angrier, stranger, more erratic, staying out, snapping in that soft, underhanded voice at things that had never bothered him. The mask wasn't just slipping. He'd stopped caring whether it was on. So out of the thing I've been avoiding for months, I told someone. I sat down with Denise, his own mother, and I told her everything. The delivery room, the 2 weeks, the email, the secret test. Saying it out loud in order to another human being was staggering. Laid end to end like that, it sounded exactly as bad as it was, and I watched his mother's face go through disbelief into something worse. Recognition. She didn't defend him. She cried, and she hugged me, and she said she'd talk to him, and she did. And in response, my husband, confronted at last by the one person whose opinion he couldn't dismiss, did not apologize, did not go back to therapy, did not fight for his family. He moved out, quietly, over about a week, and then all at once. And then he simply disappeared. Stopped answering his mother. Stopped answering me. No custody demands, no visits, no child support, no goodbye to the little girl who adored him. February came, and the phone went silent, and it never rang again. The man who once needed a minute-by-minute account of my trip to the grocery store vanished off the face of my earth. And the last big thing he ever did as my husband was demand proof he was Eli's father, and then abandon him anyway, proof in hand. I expected to collapse. Everyone braces you for the collapse. Single mother, 2 babies under 3, no income yet, husband evaporated. And it was hard, I won't lie to you. The logistics were brutal. But here's what nobody braced me for, the lightness. It crept in around the edges of the exhaustion within weeks. I went to the store one afternoon, both kids in the cart, and I was halfway home before I realized nobody was going to ask me why it took an hour and 40 minutes. Nobody was going to look through the bags. I sat in the driveway and cried, and it took me a minute to figure out that it wasn't grief. Do you know what it's like to live for years inside a pressure you've stopped being able to feel, and then have it lift? You don't feel free at first. You feel like something's missing, and then you realize the missing thing is a weight. Because the truth is, I've been downplaying it. To the strangers I've vented, to Denise, most of all to myself. It was never that he hit me. He never screamed. He never even seemed to get properly mad. And so for years I filed it all under not that bad, because I had a picture of what a bad husband looked like and Marcus didn't match the picture. But with distance, the inventory came due, and it kept coming. I had barely been allowed to leave the house except for errands with a purpose he approved of. I had no friends left, not one, because every friendship had been slowly starved by the rules. My contact with my own family had thinned to holiday calls, and I told myself that was just adult life. And the comments. That was his real instrument, the comments delivered in that mild, caring voice. That I was eating a lot lately, wasn't I? That I smelled like I'd skipped a shower. I hadn't, said with a little wrinkle of the nose while I held his baby. That he hoped Zoe didn't grow up to be like me, dropped like a joke, with a smile, so that objecting would have made me the crazy one. None of it was ever loud enough to call abuse while I was inside it. From outside, a year on, I can call it exactly what it was. Drop a comment below. Do you think they made the right call? Everyone in my life who kept telling me a man who never yells couldn't be hurting me? Because I think about how many women are being told that right now, this week, in that same reasonable voice. The kids are thriving. I need you to know that. Zoe misses her daddy, and that is the one wound in all this I can't fully heal, because to her he really was wonderful. And how do you explain to a small girl that the man who wore the plastic tiara at her tea parties chose to vanish rather than be told no? I don't try to poison her memory of him. I just love her twice as hard. Eli is a fat, giggling, perfect little boy who will never remember the 2 weeks his father conducted an interrogation over his bassinet, and I intend to keep it that way for as long as childhood allows. And Denise, his own mother, stayed. Let that tell you everything about which side of this story the truth lives on. She watches my babies every weekday while I work. She loves them ferociously, and because of her, they'll grow up knowing that side of their family, the good of it, even though their father chose the door. I got a job. My first real job, and I love it beyond all proportion of what it is, because every paycheck is a brick in a wall he can never breach again. I call my mom just to talk now, twice a week about nothing. I go to the store. That's it. That's the whole miracle. I just go to the store. We're not divorced yet, and there's no custody agreement, and I know, believe me, I know, that paperwork is the next mountain, the thing that makes the freedom legal instead of just lucky. It took me this long to feel stable enough to climb it, and I'm finally there. That's the last door to close. Here's what I want to leave you with. For 6 years, I thought I was in a good marriage with one flaw, and I was actually in a cage with excellent decorating. The email wasn't the beginning of anything. It was just the first time the bars were visible from where I was standing. If your love requires constant proof and is never proven, if the rules only ever tighten, if the cruelty always arrives in a voice too soft to object to, the size of the red flag doesn't matter. It matters that it keeps flying. It took a stranger's cold verdict about my newborn son to open my eyes, and I will always grieve that it took that much. But I'm on the other side now, and I can tell you with my whole chest, the other side is real, and it is better, and the door out is closer than the cage wants you to believe. Hey everyone, we're working toward 1,000 subscribers on this channel. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. Every one of you brings us closer. Thanks so much.